Welcome to Far East Wargaming, bringing you another Heresy Thursday. My name's Richard, and once again, Jason is with us.
Hello, everyone. Great to be back, and thanks for joining us on another Heresy Thursday.
For this week, we're actually going to be doing something slightly different, and as you can see from the title of this week's podcast, we're discussing house rules, the ones we use, the ones that are used by other people, things we might adapt, things we're thinking of doing changes, and maybe even discussing some of the things that might currently be broken with the system and potential ways to fix those.
Ooh, controversial. Some people seem to react very emotionally when you start talking about things like house rules, which is understandable, right? Because, I mean, having standardized rules as written is the easiest way to game with strangers or in events or competitions and whatnot. But house rules, I think, when your gaming group uses them or when you're using them to get more out of the game, rather than necessarily not taking an approach of nerfing things that you don't like, I do think that they have a place in the game, and it is something that you see in our battle reports, that we do tweak some of the missions and things like this. So, yeah, I'm very eager to get stuck in on this topic.
Well, we're going to start by talking about some of the rules that we've adopted that have originated from SN battle reports. And the main one is we've started to adopt their Artificer saves being limited to just the number of your initiative for characters who are paying for this upgrade.
Yes, and this is one that I actually like. This is one that not only do we play here, but I have played it at SNN events. I like it, to be quite honest with you, right? Because when you're talking about somebody who pays for it, it's typically a squad sergeant. It's a relatively cheap upgrade, 10 points. It's not fun when your sergeant tanks 6 or 7 crack missiles, right? And again, because it's only on a character that pays to upgrade it, it doesn't affect your consoles or your special characters or anybody that already comes with a native 2-up. So it's really only particular to squad sergeants if you think about it. Having played through this a lot, my opinion is I like it. It does take away a lot of the feel bad moments of somebody tanking 18 saves for something ridiculous. It's not as restrictive as you would think, because each unit that shoots at that squad sergeant, for example, let's say you shoot one unit with crack missiles. Yes, he tanks some of the crack missiles, but then if another shoots, he still gets to do the initiative thing all over again. So I like it. We've played it, and I mean, the other alternative is somehow you adjust the points of Artificer armor, because it's like the cheapest way to save people. It's even cheaper than an apothecary if you think about it. 10 points to be saving your 12-point, 15-point, 18, 20-point models. I mean, it's a reason why everybody takes it when they can.
I like it as well, and I think it's actually quite vital, since the main change that affected saves in the Horus Heresy in Warhammer 30k, from version 1 to our latest version 2, was all about positioning, and where the Artificer in the previous one was about where you positioned him. So you were always taking risks, and you could, and there wasn't an automatic chance of you getting in the way. You had to roll for the, I can't remember what it was called, but it was just sacrifice yourself instead of taking it on a certain member.
Yeah, the lookout sir rule is what that was, where you could, if your sergeant was in the front, you didn't want him taking the saves, you could lookout sir it, and that just added another round of dice rolling and more length to the game, or more length to the turn. I do like it also for that time perspective, because you have fewer sets of somebody rolling 18 dice, 15 dice, 12 dice, whatever. And yeah, it's only a few minutes here and there, but over the course of a full game or over the course of a full day's event or something like that, it does add up. So yeah, this is one that, again, that I've played a lot in multiple settings, and I'm a fan of it. It's not anything that I think has been a huge nerf to the effectivity of squad sergeants.
Yeah, and I'm also in agreement for the main reason that we've had, prior to adopting this rule, many games on the channel and in private where we've had squad sergeants tank 30 shots just on 2+, and these are just normal bolter rounds or non-AP weapons. But still, 2+ versus 3+ is saving quite a number of people, especially when you're talking about that many rounds. And yes, it is great rolling and great luck, but there's also that feel bad where you've taken one guy has tanked the entire 10-man Volkite Culverin shots on his 2+ save.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime you get into the guy tanking double-digit numbers of rolls, I mean, that's just ridiculous, and it is outside of probabilities. I get that. I guess an argument could be made. I could see the other perspective that perhaps initiative 4 is too few. I've seen some people say that online and in different chat groups and things like this. So maybe there's a happy medium, maybe it's double the initiative is the max or something like this. I don't know. So if you've tried something like this out in your own groups and you have perhaps modified it in a different way than just pure initiative, then let us know, because again, I could see both sides of this, but I would just say again that our experience, this hasn't been that restrictive of a change.
Now, this is one of the rules that we've adopted from SN, but they also have others, and we're going to just quickly go through them because we've yet to decide if we want to adopt more of them. Some we have adopted in a sense, and that first one being maximum of 3 Dreadnought type units.
Yes, this one we don't do exactly what SNN does, although I'm in general a fan of this particular rule. Unless, of course, you agree with your opponent or you agree in an event or something like this that, Fury of the Ancients is still allowed or whatever. The way we've typically been doing it is the rule of thumb of 1 Walker or 1 Dread per 1,000 points. 3 Dreads in a 3K list is still pretty difficult to deal with. I mean, let's just face it. Yes, I know, get good, whatever else you want to say, right? But I don't view this one as that restrictive either. 3 Contemptors, very powerful. 2 Contemptors and a Leviathan, or 1 Contemptor and 2 Deredeos. I mean, these are all still quite powerful lists. I've never personally run even 3 in any of my lists, not just because, I'm not anti-against it or anything like that. But even when I play my Iron Hands and I've played with just 2, opponents really struggle to do anything about them. And I think for that reason, I'm a fan of this one. Again, we've modified it for the 1 per 1,000, but I don't view this one as a bad rule either. And again, if you want to play Fury of the Ancients, just check your event rules, or just, give somebody a heads up. Like, even I don't mind playing against a Fury of the Ancients rule game if I just kind of know it's coming and I can at least have something to somewhat deal with it.
I think you're right there. We have, for our events, adopted the, like Jason says, 1 Walker per 1,000 points. And it seems to be working for us out here. I would say that for some legions, they are definitely more effective than others. The Iron Hands being one with a -1 to incoming fire, which actually makes, I think it makes the standard Contemptor immune to bolter fire for this. But then also forces like the Emperor's Children, where actually walkers are deadly against other walkers there, because if they get the charge off, they're basically killing that walker before it gets to fight back, unless it's very lucky there. I agree with restricting Dreadnoughts. It's about how you do it and how best suits the play group you're with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's kind of the whole concept, right, in a nutshell, about house rules. Again, I don't view that you should be using them to nerf things that you don't like. I think that it's more about kind of the enjoyment of the game, or it's more just kind of about making things efficient or something like this. And that's really kind of the philosophy that we've had when we've put these into place. I mean, again, who wants to see me bring 7 Iron Hands walkers? Yes, some of you out there may want to see that, but for the most part, it's not going to be enjoyable for my opponent. And it's probably not going to be fun to watch on a bat rep because he can't kill it. So yeah, it's just more quality of life in this particular regard.
Another rule they use is they limit the number of interceptor reactions to 1 per phase, including any free ones you get from augury scanners. I myself, I'm not a huge fan of the interceptor rule, but I do appreciate how they've implemented the mechanic there. And you have to bear in mind as well, even with augury scanners, you're still only allowed 3 reactions per phase. They don't allow you to breach the total number of maximum reactions you can take. They just don't count to the allotment you may have.
Yeah, I'm a bit torn on this one. And the reason why I'm torn on this, and it's not because I play Death Guard with heavy support squads, I'm more torn on it because I don't really see interceptor spam in our meta, right? And what I mean by that is, like, if I take the example of my own Death Guard, yes, I have augury scanners on multiple heavy support squads, but because of the positioning of a deep strike or a subterranean assault or an outflank or whatever, and the terrain and whatnot, it's very rare that every single one of my augury scanner units has line of sight to what's happening. So this one, again, I'm a little bit torn on, and I agree with you that the 3 reaction limit cap on any given phase from the main rules is a viable way to stop this. But again, I mean, I can tell you in at least half of my games, all those augury scanners that I've paid for don't do anything. They do 0. So that's, 30, 40, 50 points in my list that's just basically worthless because the other person is not bringing in flyers or deep striking or outflanking or subterranean assault. So this one I'm a little bit torn on. I do think that perhaps interceptor probably needs to be looked at in some fashion. I'm just not sure if limiting it to 1 is the right answer.
We will be circling back on interceptor as well, because one of the topics for today's discussion is going to be flyers later, and interceptor will be a key point of that discussion. But moving on for some of the other rules, again, this is SN's rules they've implemented, and we're discussing on if we like them and might adopt them. This one's a controversial one. Its pinning checks can only ever be modified by a maximum of -2. And for me, I don't agree with this in any way. I think that getting off successful pinning checks can be vital, and there aren't that many ways to negate it anyway. I think night fighting negates it by 1 because that negates your leadership check. Then fear will negate it by a couple, depending on what the fear is. And then shell shock again. So these are the 3 mechanics that lower your pinning check chances. I think if you can get them off together, they work fine.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. What I was just going to say is there's also the psychic shooting attack. One of the disciplines, and the name escapes me right now, where basically the number of hits that the target unit takes from this psychic shooting attack, it's affecting their pinning check. And in some cases, it can be absolutely brutal, almost essentially auto-pinning the target. If that was the intent of this rule, to me, a better fix is actually go back and look at that particular psychic ability. I think auto-pinning shouldn't be a mechanic, in my opinion. It really shouldn't. That's just me. Some people may disagree, and if you do, leave it in the comments. I'm kind of with you in the sense that if you're able to pull off combinations that force somebody's pinning check at a significant amount through fear or through shell shock or through night fighting, etc., I mean, that's just good general play. You're a good general in that particular regard. But again, if this is addressed at that particular psychic ability, then that's a different story. I think we need to probably go back and take a look at that, or FAQ or something like this. But yeah, this is one that I'm not necessarily a fan of, although I do understand the rationale in certain cases.
Yeah, for me, I think pinning is actually in an okay spot, even though, well, if you think about it, the majority of units that you kind of want to be pinned have high leadership. They're either got a character, leadership 9 or 10, so that's already quite high. They're stubborn or inexorable, something along those lines. Or some of them are fearless, which then it doesn't apply. I think pinning, to me personally, is fine. I've used weapons that do pinning, do have shell shock, and it's not easy. It's not as easy as everyone says to get it off when it's on its own. And if you have managed to daisy chain a whole bunch of rules for that one critical moment in the game, that was great tactics for you on your part. Now, if it's something that is constantly getting abused, it's happening to multiple units every turn, and like you said, auto pinning, then we'd have to address that. But for me personally, I've never seen it in practice, so I don't feel a need to do any modification to it.
Yeah, and probably the last comment I'll make on this is if we think about something like Nemesis Bolters and Recon Squads or other units that can take these, which is also another controversial unit choice, nobody's forcing you to stick your sergeants in line of sight. Nobody's forcing you to stick your Vexillas in line of sight. So, for example, if I'm playing with one of my aforementioned Death Guard heavy support squads and I see that the opponent has a lot of pinning weapons, I will intentionally actually keep those guys out of line of sight, but still in coherency, so they can't be chosen as a valid target. So there's ways to mitigate that as well. Again, I'm not sure I fully agree with this mechanic. I'd have to say no, I don't fully agree with this particular house rule. But yeah, I mean, maybe there's different ways to handle this again.
Another rule that they do implement is the spillover of wounds in challenges. And this was a change from 1.0 to 2.0, where in the current rule set, if you have excessive wounds in a challenge, it just counts towards the final combat resolution. So you gain an extra point in combat resolution for every additional wound. And here they're allowing spillover, which means that these wounds are passed on to the rest of the enemy unit. I'm of two minds for this one, to be honest. We don't see too many challenges on the channel that are really affected by this spillover rule. But I can see the argument for both ways. I'm honestly not opposed to how it's working right now. I think the only time I've ever seen this properly would be effective was when I was playing the demons and you had the sovereigns and they can be tied up by challenges and only able to kill one person per combat until that challenge is done. But apart from that, I think the way challenges work right now are okay.
I'm kind of with you on this. Now, I have played this rule a lot. Again, I had the honor to go play a couple of the No Retreat Horus Heresy events by SNN. What I can say is this rule was in effect. In the 10 total games that I played at those SNN events, this came up one time, right? I can go either way on this particular one. Like, I think the standard rule and the way that challenges work is perfectly fine. Yes, it's a bit annoying if you've got a squad full of chosen warriors and, you can send a mook to go tie up a Primarch or, like you said, a Demon Sovereign or something like this. Yeah, it's a little bit annoying. But to be quite honest with you, I just don't see it happening that often enough to be, to necessitate a house rule on it. Again, your meta, your mileage may vary. It might be very different in your particular area, in your particular gaming group. But I think for us and for my experience both here and in events, I just haven't seen this kind of situation come up enough where I think it warrants a house rule. But again, if you feel differently, then please, leave it in the comments.
I think this one here has a chance of being abused in a sense by people, because you're now more willing to throw in guys to challenges because it gives them all of the protection of not being attacked by other models, but all of the benefits of being able to kill those other models. If I was saying something about this, I would say that if you put this into effect, then the invulnerability of not being attacked outside of the challenge has to go as well.
Yep, fully agree.
Now, the final one that's in their official rules is regards to instant death and eternal warrior characters, and where they implement D3 wounds upon instant death on eternal warriors as opposed to just one wound. Again, for me, I've never seen this really become a factor in our games. The guys with Eternal Warrior, barring the Primarchs, generally only have 2 or 3 wounds in them. 3 or 4 maybe, actually, being a character, being a Centurion or a Praetor, something along those lines. So, again, I don't think this really warrants a house rule for how rare it comes up.
Yeah, I'm a bit torn on this one. I can think of a lot of instances, actually, where it does come up, because let's not forget that double strength versus your toughness is instant death, right? So if you're an Eternal Warrior character, if you're just sticking him in the front and he's just tanking las cannon after las cannon after las cannon, yes, it's quite annoying. So in that regard, I could actually see the value in this thing because it would stop people from kind of abusing that mechanic. Yes, I mean, I can see it from that perspective, and it does make Eternal Warrior a little bit less durable. But I'm agreeing with you as well in the sense that it just doesn't come up that much. At least in our games, it hasn't come up that much. I don't know. I'm torn. I can honestly, this is another one that I can go either way on, right? My only I say watch out on this, and there'll be another one that I talk about as a watch out, is you always have to be careful in house ruling, downgrading the effectivity of something without offsetting it somehow, right? So if somebody's paying for upgrades that give them Eternal Warrior, and then you're all of a sudden nerfing that ability, I mean, in my mind, it would make sense to actually adjust the points as well, because that person is no longer getting something that was pointed for at the same level. So it's just food for thought. This is another one of the house rules that I can go either way on. I think I lean a little bit more towards the no side, but again, I can also see why you would want to do this to stop Eternal Warrior characters from just tanking everything and, taking all these hits.
Yeah, it's a good point about the points factor. I was going to bring up the fact that most units with Eternal Warrior are expensive in themselves, so and being Eternal Warriors is why that price is so high in points. So, and as soon as you start talking about having to now potentially modify more things in the rule system, that being especially points, it's a deep rabbit hole to jump down for something I don't think that is needed. Again, let us know if it comes up more in the games you guys are playing. We've had Eternal Warrior come up maybe a handful of times, and it's never really been an issue in my opinion. If you do want to face tank a las cannon with your character, sure, go ahead. You are face tanking 10 shots at him, and he's taking his saves, but they're going to be invulnerable saves, 4-up saves, and he's only got maybe 4 wounds. So if you wish to, I say all the best to you.
Yeah, and there's actually one more that's not on the official list, but it is played at the SNN events. It was played at No Retreat. And this is the one about things like Grav and Phosphex. And the way this particular rule works is you resolve the shot as normal using the template and everything else, but you don't leave it on the table as difficult or dangerous terrain. And the thinking behind this is it takes time to pick up models, and then when you put the template down and when you put the models back down, sometimes they're not always in the right spot, which could lead to actual, disagreements about things like distances for charges or being in weapon range or things like this. I also understand it from the perspective of if you're running an event, once again, finding ways to shave time, because that can also be a timely process. I have 2 opinions on this one, and I'm not trying to be wishy-washy. I think in an event, okay, I can see the use for it. But I think in general, I'm not a fan of this one. And again, the reason why I'm not a fan of it is it comes back to my point I made just now about points. If I'm paying 10 or 15 points for a grav gun, baked into the cost of that grav gun is the cost for leaving the terrain, right? It's the haywire, it's the effect of the shot, but it's also the secondary rule effect of causing that terrain down there. So to me, if you're going to, again, implement this change, then you almost need to start thinking about changing points. And that's just a road in my mind that for house rules, you don't want to go down, right? Now, if GW and whoever's in charge of the Heresy and doing the FAQs, or if we ever get a rules balance, God forbid, if they decide to take a look at it in that way, okay. But for our games, or for games with a stranger, I don't like that mechanic, because again, I mean, you're taking away the effectivity of a weapon without gaining or balancing it somehow, and that's just a dangerous kind of path to tread.
I agree with you there. I don't find that the Grav or the Phosphex takes all that much time when it's used. Most of the time, it's a small little template. It's picked up 3 models, placed back on top of them, and then removed in the next phase. You've most likely already moved off it by the time it is removed, so it's not really moving any more models, it's removing a template on the table. And if it really is that much of a problem in terms of this, you can just put a marker down and say everything within 2 inches or whatever the circumference of the diameter, of the blast template is effective. I don't see this needing any. I don't see this speeding up play all that much in a single game. Maybe over the course of a 4-game day, if you're running that kind of tournament, it might save you a few minutes here and there. And also in regards to the guys who are maybe caring about the millimeters of when you're placing things back. I understand it. Rules, you're following the rules to the letter of the law. This is also wargaming, and it's amongst friends or friendly parties. There's For me personally, I give a decent amount of leeway when it comes to shot distances and things like this. That extra millimeter is not an argument I'd ever make. But yeah, to each their own there.
Yep, agree with you. And I think just to kind of sum up my opinion on what SNN is trying to do, I give them all the credit in the world, actually, right? And, you know, they're trying to try out new ideas. They are, you know, doing a lot of things. And there's a lot of groups around the world, let's face it, that are taking different looks at the Heresy rule set and trying to make improvements or trying to do their own codex, all these different kinds of things. And I think we should kind of celebrate that a little bit rather than kind of criticize it. Even if we don't agree necessarily with all of the changes that the various groups in SNN are trying out, I give them full credit for trying things and exploring it. And, you know, even if I disagree with something, I most definitely am not going to hate on anybody for it, because at the end of the day, house rules are optional. Nobody's forcing you to do it. So if you don't like it, just don't do it. There's no need for all the hate and all the venting and stuff on the internet.
I agree with you. The rule system as it is isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and finding and being able to test ways of improving them is definitely something I encourage. And it's also kind of the reason we're having this podcast today, to talk about how we ourselves at Far East Wargaming could start adapting the rule systems to maybe improve the gameplay. And like I said, I echo your opinion, Jason, that I very much give props to SN for doing this. Also, they get a lot of exposure, more than most other parties, so their rules get a lot more exposure, and therefore they'll get a lot more criticism from it. As long as it's constructive, for me, any criticism is okay. And we're, again, being constructive here. We understand why they may have done it. I think the main reason we're, I won't say against it, the main reason we're not in favor of it is just because it's never come up for the majority of the time for us at Far East Wargaming.
Yep. But again, I think that also leads into one more quick little rant I'll make, which is play test these things, right? Don't just, knee-jerk reaction to things. Try it out. Again, we tried out the Dreadnought rule, seems to be working quite well. We've tried out the initiative rule, seems to be working quite well. So, and we have some of our own that we'll talk about in the next part as well that you may not have even tried out either.
Yep, that's a good segue onto our house rules. And, well, this is really one that you may have seen. We don't bring it up too much in our battle reports because it's really a gameplay kind of thing. But the first one we do is, for us, all structures, the ground floor is line of sight blocking. So we are basically saying that all the windows are closed and all the doors are closed. So you can't shoot in or out of the ground floor of a building. This doesn't affect the second floor or the third floor of any potential buildings. But due to the way GW have made some beautiful terrain, and other parties make beautiful terrain, all these random angles with windows and potential doors, and which models can see and which models can't see through this tiny 2mm gap or a couple millimeter gaps in the scenery, is more problematic for us in a time-wise than just saying they're behind cover now and they can't see anything.
Yeah, this is a quality of life and speed of gameplay one. It's also useful if you don't have massive amounts of terrain in your collection. And let's face it, 30K is meant to be played with terrain, not parking lots. It's not 40K with standardized tournament-style Ls and all this kind of stuff. And yes, the GW Ruins terrain in all of its varieties is nice terrain. It's fantastic. But very little of it can actually be built with the ground floor actually blocking line of sight. So if you need some line of sight blockers, give this particular rule a try. It makes things easier and faster if you know that all ruins on the table have that ground floor blocked. You don't have to be peering down all the time or using lasers or doing any of this other kind of stuff to see if my tank can shoot through 3 open windows across the table at the one guy I can see his torso. So that's the reason why we play it this way. It just makes it faster. It makes it easier. And again, if you don't have massive amounts of terrain in your collection, then now all of a sudden you have the ability to put some line of sight blockers on the table, which, let's face it, needs to be done in 30K because of just how deadly the game is. Yeah, I like this rule. We've instituted it not just on channel games. We've also played this in our events because we do run Heresy events here in Malaysia. And nobody's been complaining about it. Nobody's been bothered by it because it's very simple, it's very elegant, and again, it's just very fast and easy to work with.
Another rule we implement is we've standardized the vertical distance of all the terrain. We, regardless of how big the piece is between floors, we have standardized the distance to 3 inches. Again, it's a time save for us, given the different scenery we use, the homemade stuff, the GW stuff. GW itself doesn't really standardize too much of its terrain. I think sometimes it's nearly 6 inches tall, which is honestly a bit silly for movement distance. So everything for us at Far East Wargaming, when we talk about vertical movements, every tier is 3 inches.
Yes, and just to clarify this a little bit, it's tier, right? So if you're on the old style GW ruins, those are 3-inch between floors. If you're on the newer style GW ruins, those are 5 inches between floors. And then we've made a lot of hills or a lot of plateaus or a lot of rocky features that are using the pink insulation foam, and that is not always standardized in terms of the width of the foam itself. So it just makes it easier and faster just to count each tier or each floor as the same 3 inches. In regards to the new GW terrain as well, with the ruins having a 5-inch gap between floors, that can just get silly, right? Because you can position models or you can do different things that basically make it impossible for somebody to fall back off the floor, or somebody to be able to get a charge in because their models won't fit, and then it's a 5-inch vertical distance and all these different kinds of little shenanigans. So again, this is one that we put into place just to make it fast, simple, easy to understand, to standardize the terrain. And again, it helps out a lot. Your mileage may vary. If you like the differences in the various heights, then by all means go for it. But this is also another one that we've play tested pretty extensively on the channel as well as at our events, and it seems to work pretty smoothly.
Yep, it saves getting the ruler out every time to say, well, this building is 2.5 inches, or this piece of terrain is 1.5 inches tall. No, everything's 3. Live with it. So that's the 2 pieces we have ourselves at Far East Wargaming, and that's going to cover more or less all of the house rules we want to discuss in this podcast. But then another controversial thing we want to talk about today is in regards to game turns, and we've discussed this briefly in our post-game reviews for our battle reports, but we wanted to spend a bit more time on them, especially the change that we've seen from GW themselves, where they've gone from the standard 6 turns or 5+1 turns in the original rule set to the 4-turn games in the new Siege of Chthoniya. And I think we're both in agreement, Jason and I, that 4 turns is just too few, and I can understand people saying 6 turns is too many.
Yes, and I'm going to explain why I'm not a huge fan of the Chthonian missions and 4-turn games in general. Okay, and there's 2 big reasons why I am not a fan. The first one is that you're usually playing on 6x4 tables, so you're naturally going to have more real estate. You're naturally going to have longer distances for movement, for shooting, for everything else. This isn't 40K on the smaller size tables. Okay, it's 6x4 tables. So in that sense, a 4-turn game means that there's a lot of units, armies, rights of war, whatever, that get unfairly penalized because of those distances. You haven't adjusted the table size, but you adjusted the game turns. The second reason why I'm not a fan of the 4-turn games is it unfairly penalizes some legions while giving a buff to others. So, for example, if you're playing World Eaters or you're playing another aggressive legion, and that is defined by the rules of that legion, the characters of that legion, the legion traits, the warlord traits, that's my definition of an aggressive legion, which typically are your hand-to-hand, your combat legions. You're loving 4-turn games because you're already playing aggressive. You're already trying to get up in somebody's face very fast and all these kinds of things. If you are playing a legion that, for the same reasons, tends to be more shooty, less mobile, or less aggressive and in your face, you've now got a debuff to your legion because you have less time to work with, right? So those are the 2 biggest reasons why I don't like the 4-turn games. but I'm also not a fan of 7 turns. And there is missions in the original book that it's 6 plus potentially a 7th. There's 5 plus potentially a 6th. So I'm with you. I think that the happy medium in my mind is 5-turn games with some missions allowing 5+1. That is my opinion, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of feedback or opinions online that are totally going to blast me because a lot of people love the 4-turn games, but I'm just really not a fan.
I agree. 4 turns forces you to be aggressive because, and especially if they're objective-based missions, you have to get up the board in 4 turns. And if your army is mainly heavy, so they're not running, you're moving 7 inches maximum in a turn. And that's great if you've got Dawn of War, which is lengthways. But imagine you're playing the other one where you're playing on short edges, from short edge to short edge. You're trying to move up 6 foot of table in 4 turns to get it to objectives. It's just not possible for some legions, especially the slower moving ones. I think even some rites of war where you can't run. I think you're suffering from that, Jason, for a couple of your legions there. It just unfairly penalizes you. And something I want to bring up today is the potential of modifying missions in the sense of making them a minimum of 4 turns with a high likelihood of a 5th turn on, say, a 2+, and then a lesser likelihood of a 6th turn on, say, like a 5+, something along those lines. And the reason I propose that is because there's always the chance of the 4 turns being it, like a slim chance. So you can't afford to be too passive and wait out because there might not be a 5th turn for you to suddenly move into objectives. But it still gives you a high likelihood of 5 turns to get stuff done, and the off chance if you needed it to pray for a 6th turn.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the solution, it's debatable whether it's 2+, 3+, 4+ to have a 5th, and 5+ or 6+ to have a 6th. I think you can mess around with that a little bit. We've modified it as well, especially for our battle reports. And the reason why we've done this on certain missions is we want to bring you good content. And we don't telegraph our games. We don't stop and restart if we get something that we don't like. We don't do that whatsoever. But if we look at a particular mission and we look at the armies that are coming to the channel and collectively we decide that, you know what, 4 turns probably isn't going to make for a gripping battle report, then yes, we modify that. And you will see that in our battle reports where we have changed the probabilities on game length and things like this. But again, if you're a fan of the 4-turn game and you disagree with the points that I made, by all means, bring it up. I'm just not a huge fan. I'm really not, unless they're going to do something about table sizes. And I'm also not a huge fan of 40K table sizes. I think they're honestly dumb. But again, that's just my opinion. Happy to hear yours.
I think the new table sizes is a separate discussion in 40K. I think it's also to do with the actual printing sizes they've gone with nowadays, as opposed to trying to keep it standardized at 6x4. I'm a big fan of the 6x4 boards. We use mats from places like PWorks and GameMat.eu, and they're all very close to 6x4. There's a half an inch here, half inch there that they're off by. And I don't see any problem with that size, because also when you're getting to Horus Heresy and we're getting into the larger games, which we are starting to feature on the channel, the 3,000 point games, the 3,005, 4,000 plus games there, you need that space. Just because sometimes, I think we've had it once where we played a very big game, I think Jason and we had, I think, 5,000 points each on the table. And those games you needed the space, and you needed Dawn of War as well, because just of the spread. I like bigger tables, and they're just more impressive to play on. They're more impressive for us at Far East Wargaming to record battle reports. I very much don't like the smaller boards.
Agree, and I won't beat this horse to death. But again, if you disagree with our comment on the turn length, kind of try to connect it to board size. Also, if you're going to compare to 40K, 40K is on a smaller board and it plays at a standard 2K points, not the 3K and above that Heresy plays at. But yes, we want to hear your thoughts on this one.
So moving on from game turns, another controversial topic we want to bring. I think all the topics for this one have been relatively controversial. It's the state of flyers and where they're sitting right now. and what we can do to potentially make them more viable, because if I'm honest, I don't believe they're viable at all in the current edition of Horus Heresy.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you're saying. I slightly disagree whether or not they're viable, because I have seen them played and played against them where players that were smart with their positioning and the way they brought them on the board and things like this got them onto the board with no problem. So interceptor wasn't an issue and things like this. But also, again, it's going to depend on your terrain. It's going to depend on your meta. It's going to depend on all these different things. But in general, I do agree that flyers are not in a good place. They're easy to shoot down because, let's face it, missile launcher heavy support squads, pretty popular choice. Things that have skyfire in the sense of dreadnoughts, Deredeos, those things can be used. There's lots of twin-linked weapons. There's las cannons with Sunder that even if you're not having skyfire and hitting on a 6, you're almost guaranteed to get a penetrating hit because you're re-rolling. They need some sort of tweak. Now, what that tweak is can be debated, and we could probably have an entire episode, honestly, on flyers. Do they need a points change? Do they need changes to the way skyfire works? Do they need all shots at them are snapshots, even if you have skyfire, but maybe skyfire works differently? There's a lot of different ways that this could be handled. Does the armor value of flyers need to be adjusted? Because let's face it, 11 or 12 on a flyer in a world of las cannons with interceptor, not in a good place. I do think that flyers need to be tweaked. We don't see them on the table as much as we used to. But the flip side of that is in 1.0, like, I can understand why they got nerfed, because things like a Fire Raptor were just absolutely insane. Things like a Xiphon, very good with all the various upgrades and things that you could give them, like ground tracking auguries and battle servitor controls and all the different things that you could do with Xiphons or some of the other flyers. So I understand why they adjusted them somewhat in 2.0, but I think that 2.0 is just, the overall rule set is not kind to flyers, and it's really a shame because most of them are beautiful models.
Yep. I think that the Interceptor is slightly too powerful. They actually clarified the fact that you can shoot at flyers coming in with Interceptor, because it was kind of ambiguous in the initial wording of the way flyers come in and the way Interceptor reacts, but it has been clarified that they are eligible targets for Interceptor, which to me put the final nail in the coffin for flyers. If they got at least one turn of not being fired at, they had at least some viability, in my opinion. For their points costs and the fact that it's very likely for them to die the moment they come in with Skyfire missiles, so they're from the heavy support squad missile launchers. I think they're strength 7 versus a armor 11. It's very easy to get a penetrating hit there, or even just a couple glancing hits, because they only are, I think, 3 hull points with no save that you can't jink, you can't take a shrouded from Interceptor, so you're just there eating shots from the Interceptor there. I don't see flyers as too viable. We've had a couple on the channel, and I agree with Jason, they're lovely models, and I have a Siphon, I have a Storm Eagle. They just don't come out the box anymore, because especially the Storm Eagle, it's such a fragile thing to be bringing on what you normally used to bring on in Heresy 1.0. A very expensive Death Star is now a very expensive Death Ball that gets shot down.
Oh yeah, let's not forget what happens when a flyer crashes, a transport flyer. It's, if I'm not mistaken, a strength 8 AP2 hit everybody inside that thing. It just makes it a flying coffin, right? So it's bad enough that you can't take flyers, but then if you take one that happens to be a transport as well, I mean, good luck. There's a good chance you're losing the contents of that particular air transport. So yeah, I mean, they're not in a good place. I think everybody kind of knows that. It is a shame. Would love to see this looked at by GW as part of an FAQ or something else. There's got to be some way that we can kind of deal with this. We haven't house ruled anything on flyers. We haven't tried anything on it yet, but it's probably something that we'll take offline and think about it and see if maybe there's some sort of options that we could put into place and try and test out ourselves, and maybe we'll come back in another podcast and see what works.
I think them losing their jink ability whilst getting a free round of shooting at them is kind of the biggest penalization, because Jink was a double-sided thing. Jink gave you a potential of a save, but then nerfed your effectiveness in shooting the next turn. Now you don't even have that option, and you really don't get a next turn.
Yep, exactly.
So that's our discussion quickly on flyers. And the next one is I wanted to bring up is to do with tanks and where tanks are right now. I know in the social media groups there's been discussions of tanks. I think Outer Circle did a very informative podcast or episode on where he believes tanks are now. And I'm in agreement with a lot of what was said on his podcast. And I want to bring up a few of those points here today.
Yeah, I also think vehicles are not in the best place, right? I mean, let's face it, 2.0 is very much emphasizing shooting. It's very much emphasizing things like las cannons. There's just so many ways to pop a vehicle these days that it's a shame, because just like flyers, I mean, tanks are just beautiful models and you want to see more of them on the table. But you take a risk on these all the time because they can get one-shotted. And I think what also makes it sting a little bit more is you took something that was a vehicle before in the form of a Contemptor or other dreadnoughts, and you've now made them so durable. But tanks didn't get any more durable from 1.0 to 2.0, and instead they actually are less durable, again, because of all the various weapons, most popular being the las cannon. Something needs to be done about it. Now, I disagreed. I did listen to the Outer Circle episode where he talks about vehicles. I did disagree with completely taking away the vehicle damage table. Maybe, again, there's a different way to modify the mechanic. Maybe the vehicle damage table is only applicable for, certain armor values. Maybe there's ways to adjust that vehicle table where something needs to be only blown up on an 8+, which basically means something like an AP1 or AP2 weapon would only be the only options that could actually one-shot a vehicle. I think there's different ways to tackle it. I'm not a big fan of completely taking away the vehicle damage table, but I do agree that something needs to be done. Again, could be adding more hull points. It could be changing the points values. It could be changing the damage table itself slightly. There's lots of different ways to tackle this besides just removing that vehicle damage table, because I do actually like that mechanic. And I mean, it comes from Legacy 40K, which ported over into 1.0, which is now ported over into 2.0. I don't think that I want to scrap that one, but again, your mileage may vary.
For me, if we take a look at what they did with the Contemptors, they removed the armor value for Contemptors. They gave them wounds, but the more important part is they gave them armor saves. They gave them a 2+ and a 5+ invul. That is a save, with removing the ability for them to be one-shot, and especially removing the ability for them to lose weapons, which limits their effectiveness. But they retained all of those downsides on vehicles. I think maybe a simple patch to test would be giving vehicles a save value of some sort, because to represent the guys inside fighting the fire or saving the systems that are about to blow in terms of this, whether that be a 4+ invulnerable like a Terminator has against these shots. Something more where they inherently have a save against shots, and then if you choose to, you can shroud. So you can shroud and then get that mitigation save on top of that. But as they stand right now, they're much too vulnerable, especially with the way it can be slightly abused because of the explosions and the way explosions work here in the new latest edition. It becomes quite viable just driving in certain things like small rhinos to hopefully get them blown up amongst the enemy, where everything in a certain radius takes a strength 8 hit. And we've seen it on our channel where that strength 8 hit has wiped out 2 wound 2+ models on a unlucky roll of a 1.
Yeah, I agree. I guess the angle that I'm coming from is I'm not sure what the fix is, right? Because you have to also be careful. If I come back to my own personal experience playing against an armored spearhead in 2.0, which I don't necessarily think is oppressive. I don't have anything against armored spearheads, so don't misunderstand me, audience, please. You also have to be careful that you don't do something that makes a list like that the equivalent of an Iron Hands Fury of the Ancients, right? Again, you want to tweak vehicles in a way that makes sense to add a little bit of durability, but doesn't take them so over the top that everybody's all of a sudden running fleets of land raiders because they can't be killed, or it's incredibly difficult to kill them. But I do agree that some sort of change needs to be made. The explosion one, I don't necessarily agree with that one. I think keep it at a standard strength. Keep it at what it does, because, I mean, again, yes, it has a 1 in 6 chance of destroying a Terminator or whatever else. But for every time I've seen an explosion kill 3 or 4 guys, I've seen an explosion do absolutely nothing. And that is at the strength 8. So I'm not so worried about explosions. I'm just not sure on what the fix is for vehicles. And again, you got to be careful you don't take it too far in the other direction.
Yeah, look, I like the vehicle damage table. I like the randomness of it. But for me, there's, I think, just slightly too many downsides. The blowing up on a 7, which means it's only AP1 and AP2 weapons that can actually do that. It's fair enough. But we have a prevalence of those AP weapons in the current metas. The fact that you can immobilize it, and therefore it is effectively a sitting duck and useless depending on where it was facing the first time, is a downside. The fact that you can take off its main armaments first, and the first thing they lose is its main armaments, can cripple certain vehicles, such as the Scorpius, whose main armament is its only armament there. Therefore, it's just a driving box for the rest of the game. That vehicle damage table, and it's too easy to get a penetration hit on a lot of these vehicles now. Barring, say, the 15s, the flare shield Spartans and things like this, which themselves are hard to do. And so you are looking for 6s on the damage to get penetrations there, on your damage roll to get penetrations. I think it's fair to have the off chance of that blowing up in all likelihood. But in general, for most of the vehicles, which we're working with, armor 13, armor 14, they're too squishy.
Don't disagree. I'm going to throw something out there, right? And this kind of comes back again to some of the other points I've made on house rules and things like this. Is the problem vehicles? I think we agree that the problem is vehicles, but is the problem also compounded by the fact that las cannons sunder? And so many things can take a las cannon, whether it's a land raider, whether it's a contemptor, a heavy support squad. There's just ease of access to las cannons now. I mean, do las cannons need a tweak? Do they need a points adjustment? Would that help offset some, but obviously not all, of the vulnerabilities of vehicles? Or would at least make it more likely that you'll see less las cannons on the table, right? I don't know what the fix is, right? And again, I'm very cautious on the vehicle one, because there's just so many ways to tip the balance in a different direction that was probably unintended. And if we look at the example of the FAQs or the balance adjustments that are made constantly in 40K, you see that they often go way too far on the other end, or they make a change on something and then all of a sudden it comes back to haunt them because it triggers something else that they may not have been paying attention to. But I am in agreement that vehicles need to be adjusted somehow so that they see more play, just like flyers need to have some sort of adjustment where they see more play. We haven't house ruled vehicles either, and that's probably something that we'll think about. And I know Outer Circle had some suggestions, and there's some other people that had some suggestions. And we'll try and give that a try as well and see if there's anything that we can come up with.
Like we've said repeatedly, this is all stuff we'd have to test offline before we even think about introducing it on the channel. And that just requires time. It requires playtesting, does require time there, tweaking with the rules. But I think it's very safe to say that a lot of the discussion points we've had on this podcast today need looking at with either house rule, well, via house rules, because I don't think GW is going to be addressing them anytime soon.
Agreed.
Well, that rounds up this week's Heresy Thursday. I hope you enjoyed it. This was the first time we've had a Heresy Thursday which has been mainly an open discussion. We discuss house rules, yay or nay. And please let us know in the comments if you agree, disagree, or if you have your own suggestions that you guys have tried in your own gaming communities that is working very well. We're happy to hear feedback from this. None of these house rules are perfect. because none of the rules in Heresy are perfect. So every time you make a change, there's unintended consequences, and this is something we've seen happen in our rules for GW since they began. But we're trying our best to make it as most enjoyable for us as we play, and for you as the viewer there. So look, let us know. We're happy to hear from you.
Yeah, probably the last comment I'll make is, and it gets back to the feedback. Yes, we love the feedback. For this particular episode of Heresy Thursday, if you can just tell us why. So if you disagree with something, not a problem if you disagree with it, but tell us why. Or if you've tried these house rules, tell us why it didn't work. Or if you have other suggestions, tell us why it might work. That helps us also to kind of further the conversation, and who knows, it could even lead into another Heresy Thursday discussion on different topics.
If you've stayed with us till the end, thank you very much. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel to get notified of when we release our next videos. We do a Heresy Battle Report or some such on a Monday, and a Heresy Thursday podcast discussion on a Thursday. So if you click the notification bell, you'll be notified of our latest releases. Because it helps the algorithm and helps us get a bit more exposure. But from me, Richard, thanks very much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Catch you on the next one.